Hey, Aaron, how about a mic check?
You're good.
Thank you.
Hey, everyone.
Howdy.
Hey, Nate. Good to see you again. Missed you the last one, Nate. How's it going?
Good, thanks.
Good. Guess we're still developing a quorum.
Close.
Got one.
Okay.
I like it when Eric cleans his camera with his finger. Looks like
It's
he's
not
like trying
cleaning
to
my camera, it's
crush me
trying to
like an
move.
ant.
Trying to move into what screen I'm on.
That's funny.
Apparently, I got to wait 2 months to get those gray boxes out of my office.
You can move them out. I put them in the hallway. They seem to go quicker if you do that.
Well, actually, rephrase that. 2 months to go from my current office to my new office.
Oh.
So, yeah, they'll be gone before then. Don't worry.
Yeah. Lisa, are we waiting for anything in particular?
Was actually waiting to see if Ben was going to turn his camera on.
Maybe you got a bad haircut,
Is that what it is?
probably.
I'm here, sorry. I got to toggle back and forth to see these documents and I'm looking at them. I only have one device tonight.
Yep, it's a logistical challenge, definitely. But I think we're going to try to get the stuff we're looking at on screen. So it should kind of all work out. That being said, Hi, Ben. That being said, Mr. Gomez, if you want to call us to order, I believe all of our board members are here. And then if we see other people trying to get in, we'll certainly let them in as we go.
Great. So welcome everybody to the East Greenwich Planning Board meeting of August 19th, 2002. From staff tonight, we have Lisa Bourbonnais, our town planner, and Aaron Lindo, our planning technician, and Andrew Tights, our town solicitor, and Cindy Tangnay, something close like that, as our stenographer tonight. We have, for voting members, and Lisa will take a roll call, we have Eric Yautaukas, Nate Ginsburg, Chris Pells, Kevin Murphy, Ben Lupovitz, and myself, Jason Gomez. We have 3 items on our agenda, and of substance tonight. There are a couple other small ones, so we just did item 1 on the agenda, which is our call to order, and so just a little housekeeping. Obviously, we're still virtual. The board members you see, the town staff will call people in and out as needed from our applicants. We'll, if we have a time, for any of these items for public comment, there's a way, if you're in the Zoom meeting, to raise your hand virtually, and the town staff will let you in one at a time. There's also another way, if you're on the phone line, that someone who knows what it is will tell us, probably Lisa. Other than that, we will work through the agenda items, I think, in order tonight. It seems like that makes sense. And so I'll leave it to Lisa Bourbonnais to do a roll call.
Okay, the planning board is a 6-member board, and I believe we have all 6, but when I say your name, please indicate that you're here. Mr. Lupovitz.
Here.
Mr. Murphy.
Here.
Mr. Pells.
Here.
Mr. Yautaukas.
Here.
Mr. Ginsburg, who's the vice chair.
Here.
And Chairman, Mr. Gomez.
Here.
There you go.
Okay. And how do people, when we get to public comment, we'll remind them then, how do people chime in if they'd like to say something on the phone?
Yep. So if you're obviously, if you are on a computer or iPad, at the bottom of your screen, you should have a icon come up that says raise your hand to speak. And you can hit that icon. If you're on a phone, you're going to need to dial *9, which is a virtual hand raise, so that we can see that your phone line that's indicated as an attendee here is wishing to say something, and you will be recognized one at a time. I would ask that you not use the Q&A function at the bottom. The board members and staff sometimes use that, and you'll be able to see it. Like Aaron might use it to remind me to press the record button or something like that, but that's really not appropriate to be used to ask a question of an applicant. So I would ask that the public attendees not use that functionality here tonight. Otherwise, *9 will get your hand raised. You will probably have to hit *6 on your phone, and remember to unmute your phone. Don't just start talking, because we won't be able to hear you. So *6 to unmute, *9 to raise your hand. And if you have trouble, and we can probably troubleshoot along the way. So we're pretty good at recognizing when something's gone awry. So we'll just dive in.
Okay, great, thank you. So we will move to item 3, which is our first main item on the agenda. It's the proposed reconsideration of 15 Castle Street, Assessors Map 85, Plat 1, Lot 118, currently under development as a 9-unit residential project. The site is roughly 32,000 square feet in area, and and is now owned by East Greenwich Co-Builders LLC. The project received final approval in November 2018. The preliminary plan approval was granted in April 2018, and certain unmet conditions of that decision still apply. Specifically, the applicant seeks reconsideration of condition 3 of that decision to accommodate the occupancy of market rate units at the site ahead of occupancy of deed restricted affordable units. A minor plan modification is also sought at the exact location and footprint of some structures has changed. So Lisa, is there someone for the applicant, or are we just going by the letter that was sent?
For a second, Mr. Chairman, I need to recuse myself on this one, so I'm going to turn my camera off.
Okay,
We'll
So-
we'll wave at you, Nate, when we're ready to let you back in. So he'll be muted. We do have representatives of this applicant on hand. I will give a little background on this before we let them dive in. The project has been in the works for about 3.5 years, and I think most of our board members are too new to remember the genesis of this. So I wanted to just run it down briefly if I could. The project was approved, the plan was approved under a different development team. This developer, EG Co-Builders, acquired the project site and the approved project rights after the planning board had finished its review. And so he dove in and started building, and for the most part, things have gone very well. But now we're in a little hiccup here at the end. So what I would like to do is share a screen so that people can see what we're talking about, if that's okay.
sounds great.
So what came up on your screen is the plan as approved. You can see at the should be far right of your screen, Castle Street. The project backs up to the Amtrak right of way, so this would be the railroad tracks over at this end. There were some access amenities, so a terraced sort of pedestrian entrance to the site, a common area with sort of an outdoor kitchen. This is all done essentially. These first 3 buildings are built very much according to plan. They're duplex units, so those 6 units are essentially complete. As we got to the back of the site, that's where we hit a little bit of a hiccup. So from what I understand, the developer had a buyer become interested in this site, really wanted to live here, but wanted a custom unit larger than the units that exist. And so the idea became that the final building to be built, which would be on this footprint, could maybe be that custom unit. So the plan now looks a little different than it does here as the approved plan. I'll just say that. The project site 9 units in all, 2 are required to be deed restricted affordable. What the applicant is actually seeking from you tonight, back when the project received its approval, the affordable units were required to be what I would call front loaded. So basically come online first, or at least concurrent with the market rate units. Because these front units, which are going to be market rate, are done, the applicant would like a little infusion of capital to finish out the project and would like to close on some of these units and bring the affordable units online later. So that's sort of it in a nutshell. We have to put it before you because the planning board imposed that timing condition. So the planning board is the only entity that can unimpose it or modify it in any way. So this is not going back to preliminary plans, starting over with a public hearing. We're not starting from scratch in any way. It's literally a reconsideration of that timing condition that was part of the original decision. So I'm going to let the applicant team say a few words on their own behalf here, and we can dive into the meat of what we think we need for assurances to make sure this thing gets built out the way that we had hoped. So if that's okay, Mr. Chairman.
Sure. Yeah,
Okay.
we'll hold the board's questions until we get a little more info.
Yep. So I think that says Sandy Resnick, but that's not Sandy. So I think you need to unmute.
Right.
There you go.
Thank you,
Yep.
Lisa. Appreciate that. Yeah, I would say in addition to the way that Lisa outlined that, we did have a buyer that came in who was looking for a larger single family unit. And so we shifted the affordables from the last building into another building, which has caused some delays in the timing beyond our control. We've kind of delayed the market rate units for several months as we've built out the affordables. The affordables have taken longer than we would have liked them to. And so at this point, we need roughly 30 to 60, 90 days to finish the affordables while we've had several market rate buyers who are ready to move in to units that are ready to receive their COs. So the original decision was to have, the 2 COs for the affordables come online first. Because we've received this delay from another buyer who was interested in a larger unit, we would like to have the market rate COs come online before we finish the affordable units, given everything that's going on. In addition to that, we're prepared to provide a bond that secures the completion of those affordable units above and beyond what it would cost to finish them. And that's kind of where we're headed with this, so that we can get these people who've been waiting on the sidelines into their homes.
Building inspector said 40.
Okay. So Lisa, maybe we want to tackle this issue first, and then maybe the plan changes second.
Yeah, the plan changes are really minor. There's, like I said, the 80% of the site is built out consistent with the approval.
Mhm.
The parking lot isn't quite finished, and then the footprints of the back 2 buildings are slightly different. So they're really minor modifications that wouldn't even rise to the level of being shown to the board, except that we have this decision reconsideration that's a companion piece.
Okay, so go ahead. So the plan changes are, like you said, minor. They don't change any of the, and I was here when we talked about this. I
Yep.
just can't remember any specific variances or other things that we might have granted at the time. And if the plan changes, I don't know if the plan changes would change the meat of any of those things or make those more egregious than they were in the beginning. Not to mean they were egregious, but make them worse than what we had approved before.
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit, and so can the applicant. I will bring back up on the screen the as-built plan set, which I believe you received in your packet. Give me 1 second.
Yeah, it's just hard to tell. We see the as-built one now. It's hard to tell
Yep.
what was approved before.
I understand. Let me blow this up a little bit for you. So what you saw was the approved plan. We just walked through that a little bit. So this would be, it's a smaller version, I apologize, but this is a smaller version of exactly what you just saw, showing Castle Street on the right-hand side of your screen, the Amtrak right-of-way, the rail line on the left end. As I said, the entrance amenities, the terrace pedestrian entrance, the common area, the parking area, that's all the same. These 3 footprints are the same as the approved plan. Where we got into a little difference is back here. So when the buyer that really wanted to be part of this project site decided that they wanted a unit here and wanted a slightly bigger unit than was otherwise offered in the duplex arrangements, this footprint changed a little bit. So it's smaller than the largest duplex unit, but bigger than this, what was proposed to be the single family unit, which was back here. So this building, which was supposed to be a single family unit, is now going to be a duplex. And the interior space is gained by finishing out basement areas and grabbing back living space that wasn't anticipated to be living space, so that the square footages are more equitable with the other existing units. So it's not a big change, and that footprint is really no different than was originally planned. The real difference is this unit, which is somewhere between the size of this one and the size of this one. So it's just a little footprint change there at the last building. And then the parking will be finished out along here as originally planned. And there's really no other significant difference in the plan.
So I guess in that corner, it doesn't really, even if it is a little closer to a boundary line or anything like that, it doesn't become closer to any abutter's property or things like that.
Yep, the distance to the closest residential abutter didn't change. The distance to the rail line did a little, but they're not really an aggrieved abutter, and nothing about this, I guess the north side or the Castle Street side of the project is different than the plan approval.
Okay, so I guess I flipped the order that I said we were going to do it in, but are there any, since we're talking this, are there any questions from board members on the plan changes at all for Lisa or the applicant? Yes, Mr. Lupovitz.
It's just so I'm clear, Lisa, you just flip-flopping the units. In other words, it was, and the plan from that view, the duplex was on the bottom, now that's going to go on the top. The single unit's going to go on the bottom. The number of units is still the same, but
Exactly.
it's a slight configuration based on your description. I just want to be clear.
You said that way better than I did. That's right.
Careful, he's after your planning job.
You don't really want it, Ben, believe me. So if we're done with site plan questions, I would go in a little bit to the, as we said, we wanted to front load the affordable units. This applicant has agreed to post a bond. The building official was asked for his opinion or advice on what it would take to finish out those units. The buildings are framed, they're substantially complete. There's some modifications that were needed to make the single family unit into a duplex. And he said it would probably take about $40,000 to finish them out. So we wanted that as a minimum, as a starting point. And you received the applicant's letter from their attorney that said they were willing to post a $40,000 bond. I believe they are actually willing to post a larger bond. They understand that we want to give them some strong incentive to really finish this project. We don't want it sitting there looking incomplete for years to come or anything like that. So I think they're willing to negotiate that up if the board sees fit, so we can talk about that. But there are some other conditions that we do want to impose. We don't want to see a unit count change here. The 9 units is the 9 units. I don't think anybody's opposed to that, but I would like to get that in writing as part of a decision. And they have also agreed to a time restriction. As we said, staff doesn't want to see, nor does the applicant, nor does anyone want to see this sitting there incomplete as a site and looking unfinished for a long time to come. So they have not objected to a time restriction, sort of a drop dead date, 60 or whatever days from now or from issuance of their bond. So if we want to dive into those elements of what will become a decision here, we certainly can if everybody's satisfied with the site plan change.
This is Kevin. I don't want to speak for others, nor do I want to speak prematurely and cut off comments, but I do want to mention that I'm okay with 60 or 90 for the bond. I'm very open to either. But I think you know, I'm toying with the idea, do we try to do 60, and if they need 90, we can always, you know, extend? You know, what's the feeling on that? Does staff have a recommendation regarding the 60 versus 90?
I would let Mr. Tights speak to that. He's been in closer contact actually with the applicant's team over the last week or so than I have. So let's let Mr. Tights, the solicitor, speak to that.
All right.
Okay, this is Andy Tights. I think basically you're talking not days, right? Is what you're talking about when you say 60 versus 90. They said 30 days. Therefore, I thought, you know, we should allow double that time. 60 days would be sufficient. I don't have a problem with a longer time period. I mean, I think we want to get it done, but we don't want to go and drag it into the winter either.
Yeah,
they
that's what I
said
was-
30 days, then I'm comfortable with 60 days. That's
Yeah.
double what their estimate is, so that
But then
should
we're
give them a
talking
cushion.
End of October. So, you know, I
Right.
think we go beyond that. We would all be in a place we don't want to be. So
Yes.
60 would be
So I would say
about as far
60
as I'd want to
days.
go.
Right, and then the other question was, if the estimate is $40,000 for the completion, we'd be looking for 60,000, we'd be looking for a 50% premium on it, so that we would hold the bond. So that, again, that's the incentive for them to get it done. And if the worst happens and the project collapses or people walk away and we're forced to complete it, in my experience over the years, these things are never doable for the amount that's estimated. It always ends up costing more. So the town would be protected by having that extra money. And that incentive there is, if they can do it, they can get their 40. If they don't get it done in time, then they lose the whole 60. It's not like if they don't get it done and we can do it for 40, they're not getting the 20 back. If we have to do it, we're pulling that whole 60. That's the incentive, to make sure that they get the work done and don't leave it for us.
I agree with
Fitz,
that.
did you have a question?
Yeah, my first comment is I'm inclined to support Mr. Tights' guidance. That sounds like pretty good advice, Andy. Lisa, my question is there precedent for this? Have we done something sort of kind of like this creatively before?
There's precedent for sort of each piece of this. There have been many occasions where, as a project gets built out, they are back before the board for some reconsideration of some component, whether it's a minor plan amendment or some other condition of a decision. So there's definitely precedent for that. We learned this lesson the hard way, I would say. We got burned on the provision of affordable units a couple of times by allowing them to come at the end, which is exactly why the condition was imposed with this project to front load the affordable units, was to ensure that they got done. But at this point, I think that the circumstances really are extenuating. They were working away even during COVID. They were all off site for a while. You know, there have been a lot of factors, and the fact that they're willing to agree to a very strict time limit and are willing to post the bond gives me reassurance that that's not what's going to happen here. So.
Good, thank you.
Yep. I would just suggest, and not to preclude what's going to happen here or speak for any member of the board, but if someone ends up making a motion to approve this reconsideration, I would ask that you make a motion to authorize staff to draft a decision, and I'd like to read a number of conditions into the record that I think we should consider imposing. If we're ready for that, I'm happy to do it now, not to short circuit the conversation, but.
I think there's one thing I'd like to add is that a lot of times now when we have a project, a lot of times we'll say the affordable units have to come online in proportion to the market rate units. It seems like this one, we wanted the affordable ones first. I think it is a small number of units, I would think that one of the conditions, obviously they want to get the first one sold so they can get some capital and finish the affordables. So I think one of the conditions would be that the affordables are obviously next, and no other certificate of occupancies could be provided besides the first three, I think, are the ones that are being asked for. If if I'm correct, until the affordable ones are approved.
Yep. You bring up a really good point, and I would just, for everybody's edification, realizing that not everyone has the same history with the project. At the time the project was first proposed by a different developer years and years ago, our affordable housing zoning ordinance was actually being modified at the time. We had very good language in our comp permit statute that required the proportionate bringing online of affordable units with market rate units, but that didn't exist in the standard inclusionary zoning provisions. And that's what this project was developed under. This is not a comp permit. This is a standard inclusionary project. So that language was very much evolving at the time that this project was gaining its approval. I think the language that we have in place now is a much better solution, much more reasonable, much more fair. But at the time it was a little different. So this is sort of a vestige of that.
Maybe we can, the applicant maybe looks like he wants to say something as soon as he unmutes, and we can also ask him to comment on Mr. Teitz's proposal for 60 days and 60,000. Go ahead, sir.
Can I get his name too, please?
Good point. Could the applicant unmute and provide his name also to the court, to the stenographer? Mr. Not Sandy Resnick. At least Ben thought it was funny.
Yep, that's
Hi, Lisa.
that's correct.
So I think part of the thing we're looking for here tonight is we have 5 buyers that have been waiting for several months to move in that we'd love to get in there, given the circumstances, COVID and all else aside. That's really what we're looking for. And then we wouldn't look for any more COs until the affordables were done.
All right. First off, can you provide your name to the
I'm sorry,
stenographer?
I'm Greg Morris. I'm a consultant to the developer here on this project.
Okay, so what you're looking for is specifically 5 certificate of occupancies now to get those going. Then there's 2 affordables, and then
we
there
have
would be
2 more market rates.
2 market rates. And our legal counsel has suggested maybe 60 days. That's twice as much as you asked, and then 50% more of what you suggested. So 60,000.
Yes, so we're prepared to do the 60,000, and we appreciate the 60 days that you would give us to do it. We would just ask that for those 5 COs to come online, we will finish the market rate units. We plan on selling those as soon as they are finished, and we're trying to get those done as fast as possible within 30 days, but we appreciate the 60 to get it done.
Okay. Any questions from members of the board for staff? Or yes, sir, Ben.
I'm just checking. Andy, you're good with this? Lisa, you're good with this?
This is Andy Teitz. I would just like to make clear what we're saying. So the conditions are the 2 affordable units. They are going to be posting a $60,000 bond, and that it would be done within 60 days. But in addition to which, the last 2 market rate units, no COs get issued on those until after the affordable units are done. So if for some reason, they walk away or they don't have it within 60 days, they can't just walk away for the money and say, oh, we'll still get those last 2 market rates. Those last 2 market rates units don't get COs until the affordable units get COs.
I guess I'd like to clarify that's a good suggestion, Andy. When are we saying the clock starts? So everybody's on the same page. Is it today?
When the bond is posted.
When the bond is issued, yeah.
So can I just read the conditions that we've drafted into the record? And I would ask that if someone ultimately makes a motion to approve this, that these be incorporated. The total unit count at the subject parcel, 15 Castle Street, shall be 9 units, with 2 of them being deed restricted affordable per the state's definition. No additional units, including accessory units, shall be allowed. The building official is authorized to issue not more than 5 certificates of occupancy for market rate units prior to the 2 affordable units being completed and receiving their certificates of occupancy. The developer shall issue a performance bond to the town of East Greenwich in the amount of $60,000 to guarantee completion of the 2 affordable units. No certificates of occupancy will be granted until the bond is issued. The affordable dwelling units shall be completed within 60 days of the posting of the performance bond. The final 2 market rate certificates of occupancy shall not be issued until the 2 affordable unit certificates are issued. And the final condition is 14 on-site parking spaces are required to serve the 9 dwelling units at 15 Castle Street. Failure to provide adequate parking could result in forfeiture of 1 or more certificates of occupancy. The parking was a big deal in the original discussion. It's become an even bigger deal since. And since not all of the parking spaces exist on site yet, they're not shown on the as-built plan that was submitted to you. I just want some guarantee that we are going to get them.
Those are all great revisions.
On the comment, on the conditions that Lisa read? Okay, any questions from the applicant or comments on the conditions as we're discussing?
No comments. We're prepared to do all of that.
Okay. So if the board doesn't have any comments or questions and the applicant is all set and Andy's all set, maybe someone on the board is ready to give a motion. Mr. Lupovitz.
I would like to move that we approve the request by the applicant subject to the conditions that were presented by Lisa.
Great. So we have a motion to approve them and seconded by
Second.
Mr. Murphy, or by either Mr. Murphy or Pels. We'll see who was quicker. Any discussion on the?
Before you,
Yes, sir. Yes, Andy.
well, I was also gonna suggest, if we could have include a finding of fact here that, although it's unusual to bond a private improvement, in effect, the improvement, which is the provision of affordable housing, does have a public benefit, and thus justifies you having a public bond for it.
Okay. Do we have to include that in the motion, or is it just good enough that you
Yeah,
said
if the
it?
mover of the motion could just say, so moved, that would be good.
So moved.
Okay, so we're adding that finding of fact in there. So is by Mr. We had the motion by Mr. Lupovitz and seconded by Mr. Murphy. Is there any discussion on top of this that anybody wants to add? There being none, Lisa will make us vote.
Make you vote.
Make you vote.
When I say your name, if you could just indicate whether or not you support the motion. Mr. Pels,
Aye.
Mr. Murphy,
Aye.
Mr. Yaltakis,
Aye.
Mr. Gomez,
Aye.
and Mr. Lupovitz.
Aye.
And I would note again for the record that Mr. Ginsburg is recused.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about Nate. Sorry, Nate. So the motion passes. Congratulations. You are all set. Good luck.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Okay.
If
Someone will poke Nate, I assume, to get him back online. Here he comes. There you are.
There we
Welcome
go.
back.
Jason.
So we're going to go on to item 4, which is our second big item on the agenda, the pre-application review. So pre-application review, just for everybody, the board knows this, and for everybody out there in TV land, that the applicant is going to give us kind of an overview of what they're thinking. Very little engineering has been done. It really is just a concept. We're not voting on anything tonight. We're not, nothing is being approved. This is the first time the board has seen this. We just saw the plans online within the last couple of days. So we may have some questions for the applicant about things. And it really is a very conceptual type thing. So just wanted to get that out there. So it's the pre-application review of a major residential comprehensive permit project for property owned by Ned Capozzi, Modern Industries, Inc., located at Division Road across from Westfield Drive, map 67, plot 13, lots 35 and 53. It's zoned Farm F2 which is farm zone, and you need 2 acres to build a single family housing right now, as the zoning is. The subject property is just over 80 acres and currently vacant. The applicant intends to build approximately 418 new dwelling units in a variety of housing types and styles, ranging from multi-story apartment buildings to small single-family cottages. This constitutes a major land development, and because the applicant will deed restrict more than 25% of the total units as affordable, it qualifies for a comprehensive permit submission and is eligible for an expedited review. So again, for the folks online, a comprehensive permit, again, as it says, is if the applicant is going to provide 25% or more affordable units, then they get they don't have to go to all the different boards and approval bodies in a town. They get the planning board is vested with all the approval process that is needed. We still go through the same three different voting times, but the applicant, if there are zoning variances and things that are needed, all that is granted by our review and in our vote at the planning board. I guess at this point, we just look for someone from the applicant, and a bunch of windows have popped up, so it looks like we have some folks here from the applicant. Mr. Landry?
Good evening, Mr. Gomez, members of the board.
Let me interrupt just 1 second. Lisa, would you give me control of the screen so I can share some images for Mr. Landry? Still says we're just, oh, there we go. Okay, 1 second here. Excuse me just 1 minute.
Just so folks at home know what's going on, Mr. Landry is the attorney for the applicant and will be giving us an overview of the project, and Mr. Powers, who is an architect, if I remember correctly, who will be duly sworn in as noted, is asking for control of the board so he can have some pictures that Mr. Landry can use to show everybody what's going on.
Can you all see that?
Yes,
Yes.
thank you, Don.
Okay.
Thanks, Don. For the record, William Landry, I'm a partner with Blish and Kavanaugh in Providence, representing Ned Capozzi in Modern Industries, and we're thankful for this opportunity for Mr. Capozzi and his team to present their concept plan for this property. The site, which you see now on the screen, is an 80-acre tract up in the northwest corner of the town, where Division Road and West Greenwich and East Greenwich and Coventry converge. We're going to be presenting as compactly as we can tonight a concept plan for this site that's been modeled after the town's own plan for this specific property in its comprehensive plan. The comp plan calls for the property to not continue with its current F2 low density single family housing status, but to be converted to more diverse use, emphasizing more diverse housing at very high densities, in excess of 5 units per acre, and potentially 12 to 16 to 20 units per acre is what the comp plan recites as its vision for the site. It also contemplates that at least 20% of the units will be deed restricted for low or moderate income housing. Our expectation here is that we'll have moderate income housing deed restricted for in excess of the minimum 30 years. The plan we're presenting tonight involves a a creative mix of different types of housing that meets different housing needs within the town. And it limits its density to the very low end of what the comp plan contemplates, approximately 5 units per acre. It also takes advantage, as you'll see, of the unique topography of the site to create extensive open space, extensive and attractive open space amenities. And it provides for not 20%, but 25% of the units to be deed restricted for lower moderate income housing. That is that's over the minimum that the town has specified, but it is the minimum when an applicant is proceeding under the Low and Moderate Income Housing Act. From a process perspective, 2 things. We are proceeding as a comprehensive permit under the Low and Moderate Income Housing Act. The overarching criterion for consideration of which is the consistency of the proposal with the local comprehensive community plan. And as Mr. Gomez mentioned, the act gives the board, not the council, the authority to change the zoning to conform to this special zoning status for high density housing that the comprehensive plan contemplates. The project will, as is the case for all other major land development projects, proceed in a sequenced fashion from concept to definitive plan. We're at the earliest stage, as Mr. Gomez presented. The engineering team has been actively dealing with a variety of projects, but the details of those and the substance of those are well out ahead of us. But so that you'll know what we're working on and that you'll see details on in the near future include a potential sewer connection to the West Warwick sewer treatment facility through the towns of East Greenwich, West Greenwich, and Coventry, and finally West Warwick. And there's also been significant evolving consideration to the grading of the site and both on-site and off-site stormwater management. We know that traffic will be an issue for the board and for members of the public in the surrounding area. We've engaged Beta Engineering to conduct a comprehensive traffic study that we do intend to present at the master plan concept stage of review, which would be the next step in this process. So that having been said, I'd like to introduce the project's professional team that includes Don Powers, who you see on the screen now, and Jeremy Lake from their firm, Union Studios, Dennis DePreet, Nicole Riley, and Audi Osgood from DePreet Engineering. If there are any concept-based questions regarding engineering tonight, Audi Osgood would be happy to take those. And also U Fisher Homes, a seasoned, highly respected developer of quality housing is part of our team. And they're represented on the call tonight by Sarah Fisher and Mark Powers. And I believe U Fisher, the dean of that company, is also participating. So I'll turn it over to Don now and ask that he be sworn and that he and Jeremy take you through the project plan.
So how would you like to?
Yeah, that sounds great. I had a quick question for Lisa and or Andy. In a pre-app, do we need to get the applicant's experts to swear in? And if we do, if our stenographer would do that, that'd be great.
This is Andy. No, this isn't a public hearing. So they don't even have to be presenting experts. You're not going to be making any decision on this. So there's not, I would say it's not necessary to have them sworn in. Just as, like I said, it's not a public hearing, so you're not going to be having public comment either.
We might, we'll see. Sorry, Andy.
Yeah, I view it as just the board's role is to respond and provide
That's
guidance.
fine. Mr. Landry, is that okay? I know you asked for Mr. Powers to be sworn
No,
in.
that's fine.
We're happy to do it, but we don't need to.
I know some boards do it. The only reason I mentioned it, Mr. Chair, is that I think you may have
Yeah, I did. And I
to swear in, but it's very, very common to not have that, and that's perfectly acceptable.
Okay, great. We'll save a little bit of time then. Go ahead, Mr. Powers.
Okay, thank you, everybody. We're excited to present this. We've been working on this for some time now and feel like we have a plan that not only meets the comprehensive plan for the town, but I think is in the right location and has a lot of merits for it. So my presentation is going to, after we get through this introduction, I'm going to take just a couple of minutes to talk about some of the project goals and the principles. And I apologize in advance if some of you heard me in this kind of sermon before. I don't mean to have it come off that way, but I think it's important to understand the mindset from which we're approaching this project. So I will, and then after that, we'll go into the proposal in detail and leave time for discussion afterwards. So we've been through this slide, so I'll tab through that. I just wanted to introduce my firm and say that that we've been around since 2001. We're a Providence firm with 25 planners, and we work all over the country and occasionally outside of the country. I think the main point I want to emphasize is that our whole mission as a firm has been around community design and enriching communities through design. We are not specialists in any one type. We're specialists in making places. And I think that's important to say right out of the gate. The next thing I wanted to say is that we're operating under a school of thought called New Urbanism. And some of you may have heard of that and some of you may not. The point of New Urbanism, or probably the most famous example of New Urbanism that many of you have seen, for better or for worse, is a town called Seaside in the Panhandle in Florida. And what's so important about this town is that it was the first time in about 60 years that a new town had been designed along the principles of the existing historic towns that we all seem to love. Basically, it was a response to this, which is all too familiar to all of us. And it essentially, these slides, I won't describe each one other than to say what they represent is a world that's been designed exclusively for the benefit and the ease of traveling around by car, and to the detriment of the kind of places most people or many people like to live. So just to illustrate that a little more, I mean, I think we all know what this is, this clover leaf, and what it represents. But when we see a slide like this one right here, we intuitively know what the difference between those two things is. One was designed before the automobile and represents a fine scale of mix of uses and mix of open spaces and kinds of dwellings, from apartments to single family houses. And the other represents just a way to get cars to subdivisions and to shopping plazas. A little closer to home, this is an aerial of Main Street in East Greenwich, and you can just see, looking at that without knowing any of it, that it's built to a smaller increment, and it's built as a series of blocks that have roads on all sides. Contrast that to, again, this clover leaf, and this is out at the intersection of Route 2 and Division Road. And you understand immediately why people sort of react negatively against contemporary development, because this is what contemporary development has been. So with that said, I would just point out that This is the neighboring development to our site, Cedar Ridge. And this has, I'm not disparaging this, many people genuinely prefer the convenience and the access that this type of planning provides. You have large units, they're easy to get to with garage access right off the road. But what we're contrasting tonight is this vision of building a neighborhood, and I'm quite sure that the people that live in this neighborhood love their homes. I'm not making any kind of value judgment other than to say what we're trying to do is this. And this is Revolution Street in the Hill and Harbor. And just some features of this. The homes are up close to the street. The streets are relatively narrow. There's landscape everywhere, and there's a sense of it being a place that you would like to walk in, and many people do walk in. So having said that, as a way of just framing what we're interested in and what we're trying to do, I want to walk you through in detail the proposed scheme. First, we'll start with the site design. So as Mr. Landry said, we've got Interstate 95 on the top. Cedar Ridge is the development to the left. Division Road is looping around the lower part of that red shape. Significantly, the center of New England is in the upper left. And while not walkable because you'd have to cross the highway, I think it's a real asset to this neighborhood that it's so close. If you zoom in a little bit closer, you can see the is that the Ross Incorporated building, which is the red building on the upper left, which is a little carve out. And one thing I want to point out in this slide is the amount of topography that's on the site. All of those lines, as many of you know, represent kind of a 1 foot or 2 foot increment across the site. And so you can see where those lines get closer together, you've got steep slopes. And where the white area is, that's the areas of the most level slope. The other feature on the site, which is notable to anyone who's walked it, is that it's defined in the center by this long and very interesting boulder-strewn wetland that in the spring and with the snow melt actually has running water in a series of ways. So it's a natural feature that was the first thing that we wanted to preserve and use as an organizing principle for the neighborhood. We then took all the other areas of the steep slopes, the areas that are inconvenient to build on, but might have value as open space to the unit, and we sequestered those areas. You can see they roughly correspond to those orange areas where there's the most orange. On the left side of the site, there are several sort of historic assets that we wanted to acknowledge and enhance and make part of the amenity of living in this neighborhood, and also as an offering to people coming into this neighborhood from outside. So you have the historic cemetery at the Joseph Carpenter lot. There's an old stone foundation, which we don't quite know the history of, but it's very interesting. And then further up towards the Vision, there's the historic Spencer Shippey Lot Cemetery, which is got some very, very old gravestones in it. This also happens to be the low point in the site. So conceptually, we've been thinking about as a means both of buffering to the neighborhoods such as they exist, to the neighbors such as they exist, and as a way of making a logical dispersal of the stormwater. We would drain to these points and make an interconnected series of detention ponds, one of which at least we hope to make have a permanent level of water in it to create a water feature for the site. Because we have access across from Westfield Drive and further down to the west, those are the only 2 points where we abut Division Street, and they make the logical 2 points to access the interior of the site. And when you take that along with the wetlands that we identified in the center, a logical main ingress and egress appears in this dashed line right here. And then we took the rest of the site and with sensitivity to the grading and how roads would traverse these slopes, both up and down and parallel to them, we divided these into a series of blocks. They're not the rectilinear blocks that you find in the Hill and Harbor district, because this is much more topography and it's a much more natural setting. but they still have that feature of having every block have frontage on multiple sides. And I set that in contrast to a sort of cul-de-sac kind of arrangement where there's one access road in and a turnaround at the end. So all of those considerations led us to this first concept plan, and I'll just walk you through some of the features of that plan now. What you see is now the roads that are laid out, reflecting a diagram that I just showed you with the central green in the center. There are a series of smaller greens that I will point out. I hope you can see my cursor moving around, but the central green is right here. And then there are a series of sort of smaller neighborhood greens that are dispersed all the way around at every location where the geometry allows it. And we thought we needed a little more public and open space. The units deploy, and one thing I should point out, these yellow and gray and taupe squares do not represent buildings, they represent lots or the equivalent of lots. We're not quite sure yet if this is going to be a condominium type structure or if they're going to be fee simple lots, but in any case, don't confuse all of the yellow and gray for actual building, it just represents lots. But within those lots, we have several types of dwellings. We have 136 multifamily proposed at this corner of the lot. And significantly, this is an area of steep slopes. It's closer to the highway, which suggests that the units could be a different type and could be a bigger scale, but it still participates in the major public space that we're creating. It's separated slightly from that space by a community building in the middle where my cursor is. But we've used that green space and the location of the multifamily to anchor the primary central space of the plan. In addition to the larger multifamilies, which each one of these blocks would be about 32 units, we also have what we're calling manor houses, and these are sort of smaller format multifamily. We're not totally convinced that all of them will be that type, but these are smaller multifamilies that could house up to 6 units, smaller units, and they're designed to sort of transition between the larger scale multifamily and the single family stuff. And I will show you images of that so you get a better sense of that. But note how they're located. You've got the larger scale multifamily, and then at each one of the public spaces or the common spaces, these larger format manor houses anchor the ends of that space and provide a transition from a place where you want more people to be able to enjoy the amenity, and then it disperses out to single family and looser stuff at the edges. The remainder of the lots are a combination of cottages, which are these gray lots right here, small single family houses and larger single family houses. And all of those in those 3 categories are what's called rear loaded, and that's just a jargony term to mean that there's a shared driveway that gets you to the back of these units where you park your car. That doesn't mean that everybody has to come in through their garage. Every unit has a front door on a public street, but the cars are confined to a shared driveway that links the backs of these units and comes out again at the other end. And I'll show you some images of that. At the perimeter of the site, and if you can see where my cursor is going, these are more conventional homes that we probably all recognize that will have a garage accessed directly from the road on which the house fronts. So this is an aerial view just to give you a sense, and what this drawing is really intended to do is sort of communicate the connection of the public spaces and the scale just by the nature of the rooftops. But let's zoom in just a little bit, and well, I'll orient you that this is the west entry off Division, the east entry opposite Westfield down here. You can see where the text is popping in. The center of New England is up to the left here. Cedar Ridge is just to the left behind a buffer. and then Route 95 to the north. And so if you zoom in on the entrance that's opposite Westfield, you see some suggestion of that water feature that's really a well-designed stormwater retention basin that will be lined to keep it full to a certain degree all the time. And off of that, you would have a trail that connects the cemetery and this old stone foundation and the Joseph Carpenter lot to create right at the front kind of a public amenity that is not just for the residents here. There will be no gate here. It's for anybody who comes into the community. And those are all linked by what we're calling for now the Heritage Trail, which links around all those things. And the scale of this, by the way, is bigger than you might imagine. It's a fair distance to walk the loop that we're showing in this combination of features right here. So it's not a gratuitous thing we're adding. But also you can sense the scale of the interconnected blocks and streets, the neighborhood green right here, the stormwater ponds. If we zoom in on another part, this is the central green. And the nature of the central green is that it would be left more or less wild. We're not proposing that this would be, obviously, because it's wetlands, kind of leveled off and there'd be a big lawn. It would be a bosque of trees with the wetland and the boulders still in place as they are now. So that's that right there. The community building heads one end of the central green. The neighborhood on the right has its own green. And then when we go to the western side of the property, we again see the series of, here's the access in the lower left, and then a series of greens that anchor different neighborhoods within the neighborhood is how I like to think about it. So to give you a sense of what that architecture is, this is a composite site plan that combines all the different kinds of lots for the single family homes. And you can see that as you go down on the left-hand side, all of the units on the left-hand side are accessed from what we're calling the shared driveway on the back. And those can be larger units or smaller units. The unit to the bottom in this string is what we're calling a cottage lot. And significantly, what we've done there is we've set that one on a much deeper setback from the road and left what we call kind of a linear green in front of it that links a series of cottages. So it's a way of adding variety to the street and providing, giving the real estate that otherwise would just be given to the unit back to the community. On the right-hand side are the variety of what we call front-loaded lots, and they would be a combination of units that have sort of long driveways accessing a garage in the back of the lot, like you see a lot of on the Hill and Harbor District, and the more conventional types of houses that would have the garage closer to the front, although still set behind a porch in the front of the house. And those would be, I think we'd all recognize those as sort of conventional homes. The architecture itself, these are some examples. These are all built examples of stuff we've done around the country. Images of the cottages, which would primarily be 1 story or 1.5 stories. The single family detached that has, you just see the house at the front and you don't see the garage. And on the right, the single family detached that also has, this is a combination of the garage being way at the back, but also an example of what one with a garage on the front could look like in the lower right. I talked about the manor houses, and on the right is just a little sketch we did to suggest that you could have sort of 3 one-bedroom apartments per floor on 2 floors. And if you design that well, it comes together into the scale of sort of a big house, like where my cursor is right now. For the multifamily themselves, we're thinking those are 3 or 4 stories. This is a rendering of one that, I'm sorry, let's go back. This is a rendering of one that's under construction right now west of Boston. And it's not exactly what we're doing. It just gives you a sense of the scale where you're trying to create a 2 or a 3-story scale with an additional attic story above. So that helps to keep the scale more residential. There was a question in the TRC about how would we be building out the homes? Would we be doing it? Would there be any kind of design guidelines, or would we have a set of standard plans? And I wanted to. That decision hasn't totally been made, but I wanted to offer some encouragement that these are the 5 standard plans from a neighborhood we did down in New York State. And these are the basic floor plans with the basic elevations for each. For each one of those floor plans, there were several elevation options, and that ended up creating a variety of home on the street that's represented by this grid. Ultimately, these were the first 4 that were built in the model house. There's now 240 homes in this neighborhood, and it represents, nobody would ever understand that there are only 5 floor plans for the whole neighborhood. So I wanted to offer that as some assurance that you can create variety even if you have a limited number of chassis, so to speak, for each of the houses. So I want to drill down a little bit more into the open space. So this drawing is the same plan, but with the architecture sort of blanked out and the green spaces left behind. And in this image, you can see the variety. There's these smaller greens like green A right here. There are bigger greens that may be anchored by some community structure that we don't know what that could be yet. It could be a simple pavilion, but it also could have some function like a common grill or barbecue. The bigger community building opposite the multifamily would be the one where the community organizations, both from the multifamily and the single family neighborhood, they could come together in this location. And then there are a series of different types. This elliptical one right here, which we'll show a rendering of, in which the road sort of leaves the units behind, and the units have a front door that's accessed only by a sidewalk. And that's a very nice thing. It creates a bit of an issue for life safety, which we have resolved in the past in many different ways, and we expect that to be a negotiation or a collaboration with both DPW and the fire chief. But the point is, it's another type of open space and another variety of how a home could sit on it. Then I wanted to point out this little section in the middle of one run of single family houses. We would put in a set of cottages that are set further back, and so you get this varying of the street in and out, and suddenly driving down you get a deep setback with this linear green. And all of these walking trails and trails lead out to the stormwater ponds and to the walking trail that moves all along the perimeter where my cursor is going right now. So it's been an effort to create a neighborhood that is compact enough that you definitely feel as you're walking through it that you know and you can see your neighbors. And I keep pointing to the Hill as a neighborhood that I lived in for 10 years, where it very literally does exactly what we're trying to do here, that people do sit on their porches, and there is a kind of social life that comes that you can't get when everybody primary public space is out the back on a patio. To give you a sense of the different scale of some of those spaces, this is the central green space, and we compared that at the same scale to the Roger Williams Park that is, I would say, just to the right of the train station in Providence. And we sort of use this one just because a lot of people have driven by it, but you can tell if you have that we're not talking about leftover little strips of space. That's a significant green space that we're providing for a neighborhood of 400 folks. And then these are images taken from our plans, scaled to actual built spaces. The two on the top are in Reynolds Farm, which is a neighborhood we hope to get some of you or all of you out to see, where we did part of the planning 10 years ago. Much of that neighborhood is built out, and while I would say it's not an exact corollary to what we're proposing, many of the things like these small public spaces are analogous. And then one other space that you all will know is the top of the hill at Academy Field, which, because of the slope, it in and of itself sets up as its own little public space. And that you can see in scale relative to the other public spaces we're showing here, the common spaces. This is an image of that. Again, this gives you a sense of the scale. These are not leftover flower beds, but these are significant and usable green spaces. This is an image of one of those lozenge-shaped spaces at Reynolds Farm, with incorporating some of the stormwater retention and being anchored, as you can just barely see to the left, behind the tree that's not in bloom. You can see a community pavilion that serves as a neighborhood gathering place on 4th of July or Memorial Day and things like that. And when you look at what we are intending, this is the rendering of the one I told you has the road going around, and it leaves just a walkway in front of the units themselves, just to give you a sense of the scale and what you can do. And these are all techniques, by the way, that were sort of lost to the planning art when we decided that the highest and most important function of a road was to get you to the garage. And these are sort of techniques that happened all over the country prior to World War II to create special, intimate common spaces and create a sense of neighborhood. I want to walk through just very briefly the types of roadways that we're proposing and the dimensions of those, because that's been the subject of some conversation at the TRC. This would be our primary street. That would be the one that connects from Division all the way through the neighborhood and out to Division. We're proposing that the paved area be a total of 36 feet wide with parking on both sides, and a travel lane in the middle of 20 feet. In addition to that, there are tree strips, and then the sidewalk, and then another setback to the units themselves. One of the secondary roads, we lose the parking on one side. We still have 28 feet clear of pavement, but we have parking on one side. We still have the tree strip and the sidewalk behind it, and you can see the relationship to the front porches. I want to digress right now and say one of the comments out of the TRC were that the staff and the town engineer and head of the DPW was uncomfortable with the road widths. And I wanted to emphasize that we are not proposing these simply as an aesthetic measure to make a cute street. There's plenty of evidence which shows a direct corollary between the width of drive lanes and the speed at which people travel, regardless of what's posted on those streets. And in this basic chart, the summary of this is that with every 3 feet of increase in width, you get just slightly less than 10 miles an hour higher as a median speed traveled by the 85th percentile of drivers. So that's significant. And what makes it significant is when you realize that traffic fatalities, particularly in a neighborhood where you're trying to encourage people to walk, go up tenfold as the speed at which people travel around that neighborhood increases. So at 20 miles an hour, you have a 10% chance of dying. At 40 miles an hour, if you get hit, you have a 90% chance of dying. And and I just offer that not because I believe that the town does not know their standards and that they're not very good reasons for designing to the town standard. I just offer this as food for thought that there are also good reasons to consider it's not just an architect's conceit to make these streets narrower. It's also an attempt to reduce the danger of the streets, the speed at which people drive on them, and also the amount of pervious cover over the site. We just thought one example of that would be here at Rector Street, which we all know that street, lovely street on the hill. That's 20 feet. It varies between 20 and 22 feet, inclusive of the parking. And I don't believe Rector Street has been the scene of much dismay because it's too narrow. It's certainly, I get, and I understand completely that there are difficult things about the hill in terms of servicing them, plowing them, getting vehicle access around, but the they serve us well in other ways. And we're just making this point to have you consider carefully the width of the street that you ultimately decide we need to meet. So when parked with the street, it's much less than 20 feet, and cars are still able to travel there. There are other kinds of streets in East Greenwich, the more rural streets, and they appropriately don't have sidewalks, and when they don't, they get wider. This is 28 to 30 feet on Allen Drive, outside of the Hill and Harbor, typical of more recent streets that have been built. And this allows parking and still allows about 20 feet of travel lane if the street is parked. So the last thing about the streets that I'd like to talk about are the shared drives, and these are sort of exotic to many people, although they really shouldn't be. In fact, they existed all over the country in many of the neighborhoods that were built to the west of the Appalachians. They started to be built after cars were introduced as a way to keep the car out of the public realm, but still access the units. So you have alleys in many of the western streets, but they've been resurrected, and these are examples of them. In some of them, they're very narrow, and they require that two cars, if they're coming from opposite directions, yield to one another, as we all have done in narrow situations. But they're only accessing garages in blocks that might be at most 10 units long. And so the volume of traffic here is really not much more than would be in the parking area of a very small multifamily building. These are other examples of ones that have been built. On the left is an historic one from 1920. The others are relatively new, but we would hope to, again, we think they're important for increasing the character and the safety of the streets themselves. And we would hope that we would be able to talk those through and come to some agreement that works for everybody, including life safety officials. One other point about that is that when people have seen these shared lanes, they've said, well, there's so much pavement there, how can you justify creating all that impervious surface? But when we've done the analysis, and you can see that when you take the center line of one of those lanes and you include the skirts that lead up to the garages, you get roughly the same amount of paved area as you get when you start to add up the double width aprons leading up to garages that are further back and to the garage doors that are on the street. So it's it's a little bit more sometimes depending on how the neighborhood is, but it's counterintuitively, it's not essentially just additional pavement. And this is what it results in. I showed you this image. This is a neighborhood that we've built, and I think it would be, I'm not optimistic that we'll get you all there, but this neighborhood is fully built, and it's about a 2.5-hour drive away. And with a neighborhood of the scale of the one we're proposing, you all may decide it's worth it to make a field trip to see this, but it illustrates exactly all of the principles that we're trying to put in our proposal tonight. And this is an image of what one of our streets would look like. We feel it's a lot of people would be attracted to this, and we're hoping that we can deliver some version of this with your help over the next weeks and months. Thank you. So obviously we'd be available for any questions or comments. We're definitely interested in the board's initial reactions and what you think the points of discomfort or also the things that you may like about it.
All right. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Powers. That was a thoughtful presentation of it. And I just checked with Mr. Landry, see if there's any other folks from your team that you brought, you want to share information?
I don't believe so, Mr. Gomez. I think we're happy to take questions, but that rounds out our concept presentation.
Great, thanks. Any, we'll, as we go through this, and maybe the board has some questions for you, and I understand you're at the very beginning of your stages, and there's probably not answers to a lot of the questions. So, but we'll go through the board and get their overall comments. But are there any questions from members of the board for Mr. Powers or Mr. Landry?
Yes.
Go ahead, Ben.
Thank you, Mr. Powers, for that presentation. That was pretty thorough for a pre-app. First question is, how long do you envision this project to take to complete?
That's a good question, and that's largely an answer for the developer, for Hugh Fisher. But I will tell you that typically an absorption of 20 to 30 units a year is a pretty good pace for this. So I suspect it will go faster than that, and particularly when you assume that the multifamily units will likely be a partner developer who comes in and takes that part. And I'm kind of speculating. I leave open the possibility that Mr. Fisher has other ideas for that, but I think it's a 5 to 9 year process to build this whole neighborhood out.
And I think you made reference to, like, for example, the project in New York. Was that the scale of that project comparable to this one?
It's the total unit count in that neighborhood was about 250 units as opposed to 418, but we didn't have anywhere near the number of multifamily than we do in this one. So if you subtracted the multifamily, the two neighborhoods are getting closer, more like 300 versus 250. And certainly a walk down the street in that neighborhood would be the best way to see what we would be proposing here, because all of the dimensions, all of the setbacks, all of the road widths, all of that is represented in the Warwick Grove project.
Is that project now complete?
Yes.
What's the name of the town where it's located?
It's in Warwick, New York, and the project is called Warwick Grove.
And what's the population of Warwick, New York?
Warwick, New York is probably, I'm guessing it's about 6,000 to 8,000.
Oh, it's small, smaller than East Greenwich.
Yeah.
A little less than half. Lisa, what's the population of East Greenwich right now?
About 14.3.
So, I mean, this thing, if the population were stagnant in East Greenwich and using the basis of an average of 3, which I think is conservative, occupants per unit, and I'm open to your comments on that, Mr. Powers. I mean, according to my math, you know, we're jumping somewhere between 9 and 10% in population just with this one project. Is that about right, Mr. Powers? Over the completion, entire completion of the project as proposed.
Yeah, assuming the base numbers are what Lisa just confirmed, and your assumption of the average occupant load, I guess I can see that's right now.
All right, so it's, you know, at this very early preliminary stage, in my opinion, it seems, the scale of this thing seems mammoth for this town. But Lisa, I'm interested in your comments on an impact of something this size to a community this size, based on, I don't think your experience in this town, I don't know that there's anything that's been like this in East Greenwich, but perhaps in your professional travels along the way, knowing of other communities or your colleagues who have experienced something like this, and either the pros, the cons, or whatever other thoughts you might have.
Was that a question addressed to me or to Lisa?
No, I'm sorry, it was for Lisa, Mr. Powers.
I don't know that I have a comment at this point. I mean, there are just really a lot of undetermined things about this project so far. We don't know if any of these units are going to be age restricted. We don't know the bedroom counts. I really can't project a population to reside in this neighborhood yet, because I just don't know enough about it yet. So I can't say we'll raise the town's population by 4% or 10%. I really don't know. I can guess a little, but I don't want to speculate about impacts until we get some engineering in front of us and we know a little bit more detail. But again, the pace of development, I mean, if post-COVID, the economy is in tough shape and this actually takes 15 years to build out, that's a very different thing than if the economy stays hot and the residential market is hot and in 4 years, every unit is CO'd. So there's just a lot of uncertainty around it, and I'm not ready to comment.
And I would say that's one of the tough nuts to crack in a project like this is the phasing of it. You're not going to get ahead of the market demand for this, and you're never going to build out 400 house lots and leave it sitting there. That you would be completing each neighborhood within the neighborhood in small phases, and the difficulty there comes in satisfying all of the requirements of the whole neighborhood while you're building it in little chunks. So you're definitely not going to wake up one day and have 600 more residents than you had the day before.
I think to that point, this is Nate Ginsburg. I think you probably don't know now, but certainly when you come back for the first public review, having a sense of what the phasing is and what it looks like is going to be really important. Are we building out the multifamilies first? Are we building out one neighborhood section? Are we starting from the front of the road and working our way in? It seems pretty significant to understand how the phasing is going to work.
Absolutely.
Any other comments or questions from members of the board?
I did want to comment. Very thorough presentation. Thank you for this. It looks like the design is pretty far developed. I do appreciate the fact that there was a thought on buffers. I think that's going to be pretty significant to acceptance of a lot of what's going on here. But I guess the one question I had about the buffers and the stormwater ponds, are they intended to be full of water, or are those ponds that fill during storm events and then drain and have grasses? I'm seeing docks and boat launches or fishing areas or whatever they are, and they look pretty permanent water. They look like permanent water features.
Yeah, and my best answer is that we don't know. That to make them permanent water features requires they be lined, and then they have to have enough freeboard to actually do their job. So there's a kind of base level of water, and they still have to be able to fill up to handle a storm. We don't know if that's feasible yet. We know that the drainage would logically be in those locations. The depth of that, or whether or not we're able to make any other than the one at the front a permanent water feature, remains the question. So I'd say what you see here is sort of aspirational rather than something we could guarantee would happen, even assuming the board would want it to happen.
This is Kevin. Well, I think the good news is, Don, first of all, great job with the presentation.
Thank you.
The good news is Don's involved. I think, I mean that with sincerity. I've seen a handful of projects that Don has done, and I believe as he started out his presentation, he said something to the effect that, they do take into account a number of factors. It's not just about the lot. It's let's just say it's a holistic approach. And that's great, because we want to, when you have this much land and it be carved out in a myriad of ways, you do have to take into account the lot. You can't necessarily force certain aspects of it. I'm glad, Don, you took into consideration, the look of other developments. And while, again, it's not a comment on what we all like or dislike, you took a different tack, which is nice. You considered some more of a natural setting. You considered the fact that, people would want to walk, and kind of have a pleasant walk in between and through different roads. So no, I like the holistic approach. That's the good news. The bad news is, as Lisa said, there are so many unknowns, and I'm just paraphrasing you, Lisa, but there's so many unknowns right now in a project this size. It could take 8 years, 10 years, 12 years. And so I think if we take maybe a gradual approach to development, just like it seems like we'll have to take a gradual approach to this planning review process, because this is preliminary. I think to some extent, I'm glad Don's involved, but it's going to have to be a wait and see a little bit, and kind of a push and pull as the board continues to review the plan.
Yeah, I think one of the things we hoped to get out of tonight was, if you suspended disbelief for a minute and said that we were able to solve all the technical problems that this site and the development presents, like sewer and traffic, but for the time being, say we could solve those. Is it a vision that is appealing? Assuming you could make it work. And I think that's what, for us, that's one of the most useful feedbacks, is to say, well, if you could get it to work, that would be great. Or to say, I don't care if you get it to work, I hate it. Those, a sense of if the promise that we're making is a promise that would be appealing if it were true.
Sure. And to that, I say that the vision, as presented tonight, is appealing. I mean, obviously subject to further review, but I think it's well-intentioned. Let's put it that way.
So we've heard from a few board members, and so I'm just trying to keep the either questions or comments moving, or make it through all the board members to get their thoughts on the specific scale and size and vision, like you said, Mr. Powers. So, Mr. Pels, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I think I just start by saying, I agree with some of the prior board members' comments about the scope and size of this. Obviously, there's a lot more to be worked out there. But independent of that, I really like the concept and how this would not be yet another development on the west side of town, that it takes into consideration a lot of factors that make, a community. So, in that sense, I think it's very positive, and I look forward to hearing a little more detail next time around, and especially about the scope and phasing and the impact on the town.
By the way, hi, Chris. Chris is my
John, how are you?
We lived next door to each other for years.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, can I make one more comment?
Sure.
I'm trying to not be too colloquial, because I know I corrected Aaron Lindo one time in the minutes for adding a colloquialism, but I guess there's the old adage, how to eat an elephant. This is a large tract, so how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So, I think there's that. And by the same token, X number of years from now, you don't want this project to be a white elephant either, where it languishes, or the original vision on day one is different from the vision on 10, 15 years from start. So those are two concerns I have. Again, I'm trying to be positive and proactive, and particularly when those approach projects in a holistic manner. But those are the two concerns I have, and I just wanted to voice those now. And I apologize if I spoke out of turn, Mr. Chairman.
That's all right. We're just trying to work our way through, and the virtual stuff makes it hard for me to give dirty looks to people. So how about Mr. Yatakis?
So I guess I agree with some of the things that have been said, right? So from a concept standpoint, you have a big tract of land that to bring in mixed use like this of different areas, I think is nice. I think it shows some creativity in some of the areas. I do definitely like the inclusion of some of those green spaces scattered throughout. It does remind me of a community that I lived in before, in specifically military housing. And so for me, in my experiences, the shared drives concern me. I understand the use and the need for some of those things to access the back. And I understand the discussion that there is an opportunity for some of the houses, but not all of them, to have parking in the front. And one of the things I saw is that those shared drives in the back, you're really forcing people that you have to park both cars inside of the garage because there's nowhere else to park. And I think that the inclusion of some of the manor house units kind of really, and I understand this is a concept, but it doesn't really show some of the indications of where the parking would be. And I think that with the amount of and the density of the units, that is one of the big things that really concerns me, is that you're going to have people coming here and they're going to end up parking on weird areas. There's going to be lots of fights and lots of disagreements because there's no additional parking whatsoever.
Can I just respond to that?
Sure.
It's actually not correct. Every unit in and of itself would have, the single family units would all have at least 2 parking spaces for themselves, plus the ability to park on their apron a 3rd car. And then all of the streets have on-street parking, which is hundreds of spots throughout the neighborhood that serve. In the neighborhoods where you have shared lanes in the back, on a Saturday, for instance, folks may not want to come all the way down their lane and park in the garage if they're going to and from Home Depot. And what tends to happen is they park on streets on all the parking spaces that are out front. And that's also where all the visitors coming and going park. So there's, we'll certainly quantify exactly the parking space, but I would say if you counted the on-street spaces, you're way above what's mandated in the zoning ordinance for parking.
Okay, so my experiences were not that, having lived there. And being the guy who goes to Home Depot every weekend or Lowe's to do woodworking, because that's what I like to do, I can't do woodworking and have 2 vehicles parked in the garage at the same time. And I may be a different individual here in that I'm soon to have 2 teenage boys driving, which means I'm probably going to have 3, if not 4 vehicles. And I know that this may not be the type of community where those types of people would show up. So that is one thing that I look at and I am concerned about. I do understand that this is a concept in theory, and you guys are looking for, I would presume you're looking for feedback. So that's kind of some of the things that I've seen in the past. And I think one of the same comments that a lot of people have made, the phasing is going to be important to know and understand. I think that we have looked at, I don't know if we call it precedent, but the development on Route 2, where we put the restriction of no more than, I think it was 50 units or half the units, which is about 50 units per year, can come online to minimize the impact to things like schools. We're going to have some additional, I think, discussions on some of that stuff as the engineering develops and as we get more into the process. And I know this is not something we can address here, just the general way in which a lot of this is only because it's a comprehensive permit. And gentlemen, I know this is not anything directed towards you, just sometimes the uneasiness on my side with some of these things when such a large scale and multiple changes need to take place, where so much authority is granted to just the planning board. And I don't want to say it concerns me, it just makes me make sure that I am a little bit more critical of some of the things to make sure that we're doing the right thing by the town. But I think that overall, the concept and the idea and the way you have some of the things laid out in a first pass, 150,000 foot level, I don't think it's all that bad. I think it's actually somewhat decent. So I'm looking forward to see if you guys solve those problems and you come back for the actual application to see what kind of things you put forward and helping to identify how we're going to move forward. Thanks.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to make a point, following up on what Eric said. He referred to the Route 2 project, and we did have this conversation about phasing as part of that. And I just wanted to remind everybody, and also for the public's edification, there is a town ordinance that allows us to cap the number of building permits issued in a given year to 1% of the total year-round dwelling units in town, which right now is 53-ish hundred. And 1% of that would be 53. So we certainly can make good work of that cap to ensure a more reasonable pace of development here. I really liked what Mr. Powers said, that they would realistically expect more like 20 or 30 units a year to come online, but 50 could certainly be a cap that we could impose as an outside limit by ordinance. We have the right to do that.
And we wouldn't apply by order. Is that 50 per total in town? 1% for the town, or 1% for a given project?
Again, that's total for the town.
All right. So we wouldn't give it all to one developer either.
Exactly. It's 1% of the year-round housing units can be the cap of new building permits issued for new construction in a given year. Yes.
Right.
So it would be this project plus whatever others are going on. Yeah.
So Lisa, that's we can cap it at 1%.
Yes. You have the authority to cap it.
But if because some of these buildings, and I don't know the multifamily units, right? There's 136 proposed in 4 buildings. Quick math says those right there are close to, 130, 20, 40 some odd units per building. Right there, that means those buildings, we can say those buildings will take 4 years. I'm not saying we want to. I think that, as we go through this, we may find a nice balance.
That's a great question. I just made a note to look into this. But the way the language reads, it talks about building permits, and those multifamily housing types are often issued as one permit. It's one foundation. So I would need to make sure that we're talking about the same unit count and not number of structures. I'll have to look at that language carefully and discuss it with the building official, actually. It's a good point. Yeah.
And Lisa, I know that we're talking about it in particular to this one applicant right now. I think that for me personally, I'd like to know, regardless of whatever happens with this application, just because it's a good thing to know.
Definitely. Yep.
And I think that it's one of those things, and I think for the applicants, it's not that I don't think that from my perspective, I'm saying that I want to cap it. I think that there's a reasonable build out plan that can probably be agreed to that helps you, or if you decide to continue to move forward, I should say, would help you to meet the pricing wickets and some of those, how often you have to sell a house to be profitable to make this worth your while meeting some of the and understanding some of the impacts to some of the rest of the town's infrastructure that is a concern in these situations. I think that's just part of the process that we have to go through between now and whenever this happens. So just lots more discussion, a lot more conversations to be had moving forward. So
I wanted to build on the comment on the shared driveway. I think Eric actually touched on some good points there. Don, I appreciate certainly the effort to get traffic off of the street and to make things safer, especially to slow traffic down. I would love to know better ways to do things, even ways that aren't necessarily allowed by town ordinance. So seeing other examples of that or where it's worked in the past would be great. I had grandparents that had a house with a shared rear driveway. And it was kind of a sneaky little back way to get out of their house and get to the street, avoiding a lot of other neighbors. But it really restricted the use of their yard and being able to walk across to the back neighbors. you're going to have houses that are now bound on two sides by asphalt. Kids running through backyards might not stop at that back driveway. I could certainly see situations where it could be less safe. So that's definitely something that if it makes it to the final stages, I think we're really going to need to see some good examples of. That said, I think, Lisa, we need to know going forward here what zoning we think this lot should be judged by, because it's zoned in one way. The comprehensive master plan talks about it in a different way. Comprehensive permit allows us to do all kinds of other things. So I think it's really up in the air right now. It would be good to have a yardstick to measure some of this by going forward. So some guidance there would be hugely helpful.
I just to go on that point. Sorry to interrupt you. You can definitely chime back in, but the zone, I believe, and Lisa can correct us, that is called out, or for this area is mixed use residential. And that typically has, and I think part of the mixed use is a definition of it that Lisa can give us, but it's meant for residential, but also commercial, to allow neighborhoods like this to have a place, the people to have a place to actually walk to, as applies to just walking around. And that's the difference between things I see here, vice when you show a picture downtown. Downtown, the people have a place to walk to, with the commercial aspects to it. Is that correct, Lisa, with the mixed use residential for here?
Kind of. So if you look carefully at the comp plan, comprehensive permit plan, which is online, this site, this property is addressed very specifically in two separate chapters or elements of the plan, and that would be the land use chapter and the housing chapter. In neither of those does it spell out commercial uses that would be envisioned of coexisting on this site with the residential uses. It talks about dimensionally commercial uses being allowed by right, and especially as a sort of development type that you see downtown, where you have mixed use buildings that are commercial on the first floor with residential units above. So it talks about that specifically being allowed by right, and creating dimensional standards for commercial uses. But the mixed use doesn't actually, it says residential mixed use, and the purpose of that is because our MUPD, mixed use plan development zones, are our highest density zones that we have in East Greenwich. And the point is to incentivize affordable unit production. So the idea is that if you're taking sort of a loss, you're not making a lot of money on your deed restricted units, you have a chance to make some of that back up with commercial tenants who aren't capped at what you can charge them to rent your space or buy your space. So it's definitely an incentive. And no, there are not a lot of specifics in the comp plan about whether or not this actually has to include commercial uses. When it says residential mixed use, you may broadly define that as, the rec amenities that are going to be publicly accessible might be other uses, and that makes the project mixed use in your mind. Like it's really not specific. So yes, mixed use is encouraged. There are references to how we would contend with commercial uses dimensionally, but you're not going to find in the comp plan specific guidance about there has to be a retail use here, there has to be an ice cream shop, there has to be a restaurant, there has to be a newsstand. You're not going to find that level of guidance in the comp plan.
Thank you. Mr. Ginsburg, I'm sorry for hijacking your second question. Go right ahead.
Yeah, that's okay. My last comment that I wanted to make is basically that I don't know how much I would trust or be able to analyze a traffic study done by the owner. This is one project where I really would highly suggest the town hire someone to do our own traffic study, because I've never seen a traffic study that wasn't supportive of the project being put in.
So just for everybody's information, what we typically do is we let the applicant do their traffic study, we accept their consultant's report, and what we usually do is we send that report out to be peer reviewed by the town's own consultant, and we sort of match up where they conclude. So It's a little bit cheaper way to do it, to pay for a peer review than rather than have the town pay for its own study. That's the normal process. That's the process that's described in the land development subdivision review regulations. So I assume that's what we'll be using here.
Great, thanks. I just want to make sure we made it around. It's hard to remember who's online here. So just wanted to make sure we made it around to all the board members. If there was any other, for any of them, if there was any other opinion or thoughts they wanted to, on this project, get across to the applicant.
A question. So I don't remember if it was actually addressed, but as far as the, and I may have just missed it, the number of low income or lower moderate income housing that's being proposed, is there a percentage that you guys are thinking?
It's 25%.
25%. Okay. And
Comp plan specifies 20, but
yep. Okay.
So just, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to make everybody's night longer than it needs to be, certainly. But if you do look at the housing element of the comp plan, what it actually calls for is for the town council to proactively change the zoning of this parcel, these two parcels, from what it is now, which is farm, which is a low density residential zone, to this mixed use residential zone, under the premise that at least 20% under inclusionary zoning of those units would be deed restricted affordable. What this applicant is doing is not applying for that zone change. They're instead submitting a comp permit application, which is a less bureaucratically cumbersome route to go. But we reap the benefit of getting a greater percentage of deed restricted affordable units out of that to count toward meeting our required state mandated 10%. So we're getting 25% in lieu of 20 by going this route, which gets us to our target probably a little quicker than otherwise we would get there.
And we raised from about 4% to 6% or high 6%, I think.
We're at 4.7 now, and this would get us to mid sixes, yes. This project on its own, that's not counting all the other projects that have recently been approved, yeah.
That's right, that's right. So it puts us in a much better place, but it'd be X number of years from now, but certainly not a bad place. It's certainly, we wouldn't be going backwards, obviously, so it's not a bad thing.
Well, we wouldn't be going backwards, but I think one of the things we talked about at a previous meeting was there's a lot of these types of permits that are coming through all very closely together. And if they all expire at or around the same time, then now we are creating this big cycle where we meet the requirements today, and we're good for 25 years. And then at 25 years, we go from, hey, we're at 10% down to 1% instantly. And so that is a concern, I think, for the future, but I think that we should be thinking about that if there's ways we can help that moving forward.
Yeah, especially if we get to the 10% in the meantime, with even a portion of this project and other projects together, look at it at the totality. It's not good to look at it individually. And our mindset is probably going to change once we get to that 10%, I would hope. Okay. Any other input from the board for the applicant? I'd like to give my impression of it. Mr. Powers, I really appreciate the presentation. It was great and very thoughtful as always. And I am concerned about the scale. It's the biggest thing that I've seen in 9 years. I know that the town staff doesn't want to, or anybody at this point want to say, oh, we think it's going to have this many people in it. But the numbers that are provided are 400 and something units, and we have 5,000 or so dwellings or units in the town already. So that is about 8%, 8 to 9%. And those are numbers we know now. So those are big, and they will have an impact on the town for a long period of time. So that's what I'm concerned about. I'm also concerned with the overall density of the project. I do appreciate the neighborhood feel and what you're trying to work towards. I think that, again, that was very thoughtful in showing us the other examples was great. And I might take a drive out to Warwick, New York, if I can figure out where it is with Google Maps. Yeah, but I do think a lot of those neighborhoods have somewhere to walk to. And they do include, things in the neighborhood for the residents to work on. This parcel happens to be very isolated out in the western part of our town. It also happens to be butted up against a couple other very, very high density neighborhoods right behind it. And just because it's a town line between the two doesn't mean people are going to distinguish between the two. So all those things, are concerns of mine, and I'm just one opinion. On the board, but I do appreciate the overall thought and effort that you've put into it, and look forward to obviously you working with the town staff, and taking their comments. I know they gave you a lot of good comments in the technical review. To keep that in mind as we go forward, we rely on them to provide us the information because we are by no means experts on any of these things besides me. So with that. Lisa's going to get mad at me, and so is Andy. But I do want to ask. We've had folks online and have been looking at it. I do want to open it up, not to public comment and not to questions. And Andy's going to chime in. Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, I'm just gonna say you can't limit it, okay? If you're gonna let people talk, you can't pick and choose who you're gonna let talk.
Well, no, we're not going to pick and choose who we let talk. We will, but and everybody can talk, right? We're here. We're volunteers. I assume the applicant would want to hear what the public has to say. I saw somewhere that they want to have an information session, and to tell the truth, I want to hear what the local public has to say at every stage of this. And I would hope the board would want to hear that too. It makes a difference to us. I will caution the public. I'm not picking and choosing who gets to talk, but I do want to caution the public that I don't think it's probably the appropriate time to ask a specific question of the applicant. They're really just not going to know the answers. Yes, there'll be increased traffic. We don't have any idea about it yet because no traffic study's done. You saw kind of rough layouts of the streets. I'm sure when they get in there, the streets are going to change a little bit. The unit count's going to change a little bit. All that is going to change. So a lot of specific questions probably aren't going to be that helpful, and it'll probably change. But just like we went around with the board and there were, just kind of general feels for the project. I would like to hear that from the folks. So, but please, if someone comes in and says, I'm concerned about traffic, great. The next person that comes on, you don't have to say, I'm still concerned about traffic. We understand that. So try to come up with, if you have a unique feel that hasn't been talked about before, we'd like you to bring it forward. This will be the first time we're having any large public comment in a virtual sense. I don't know if the town council has, but we're willing to give it a shot. Lisa is all excited about it. So
would it be appropriate to do that at a separate time?
What time?
Another meeting?
Oh, we will do it at another meeting. We'll do it at the prescribed times when we have to do it. Right now, we don't have to do it,
Right.
but this is my personal opinion. I always feel that it's good to get their point of view, especially since they've put the time in to come to the meeting and have listened to this. And I don't know. That's my thought on it.
I think
So it's while it's not an advertised and noticed public hearing, as we will have later in this process, it is a public meeting, and Jason's right. They've taken the time to listen, and they can certainly respond. We had a couple of hands go up earlier. They went back down. I don't know if those people still have questions. I'm happy to call on them if they want to re-raise their hand. We did have a question asked in the Q&A, which was whether or not the Warwick New York project was an age-restricted project versus family housing. And I don't know if the applicant team wants to just first answer that question because it did come in a bit ago, and then we'll get to the hands, if that's okay.
Yes, the Warwick Grove project was age restricted. It was rather loosely, and there was some provision for adult children to be there for some portion of the year, for to account for college students and things like that, but it was age restricted.
Thank you.
And just to be clear, this one is not age restricted at this point?
That's not currently part of the proposal. No.
Okay, so against everybody's better judgment, we are going to open it up to at least public opinions. Sorry, Mr. Pels. But so Lisa, if someone raises their hand, would you mind punching them in? We're gonna, please don't go on forever. Just give us your points and then let other people get on. This is a difficult way to do this online like this, but we want to hear your thoughts. Just tell us. This isn't on the record, obviously, because we're not voting on anything. But we do want you to tell us your name and your relation to this project.
Okay, I only see one hand up at the current moment, and that is from Karen Kornthal. So I'm going to promote her so that she can speak. Give her a second to get looped in.
Looks like she's still
Hi,
muted.
do you hear me now?
Yep.
Oh, hi. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I live in right off of Westfield, so obviously this will impact me and my community directly. But when I was looking at the picture of the development, I only saw 2 exits and entrances, and both on Division Street. And is that correct or not?
Yeah, I think that's correct. If the applicant can chime in if I answer something wrong, but yeah, I think that's the current plan, the 2 entrances on and off. I don't think they have street access on any other street besides Division.
Okay. Is that something sort of written in stone?
Go ahead, Mr. Powers, but I just don't think there's any other way.
We don't have the physical possibility to connect. That's the only 2 places where the site is not landlocked by other parcels. So you only have frontage on Division at those 2 places.
Okay. I don't need to say anything because everybody said it, but I am concerned with this massive scale. But thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Oh yeah, no problem. Thank you. So if anybody else raises a hand, in the meantime, I can suggest if Mr. Powers wants to put in a casino, maybe he can get his own exit off of 95. That'd be good.
We have one additional hand up right now, and that I'm pulling this person, Sharon, into the conversation.
Hey Sharon, we see your box. It just looks like you're muted. Still muted.
Still muted.
Sharon, if you can unmute yourself, then we could. Oh, there you go.
There we go.
Okay, I'm not Sharon, obviously. I'm using my wife's computer.
Okay.
Sharon's got a deep voice. Okay.
She does. It's a steroid. Anyway, I have just one question and a minor comment, not to make a big deal out of this. But you said that there's 25% of low and moderate deed restricted units. My concern is where's the median coming from? Is it from the county of Kent, or is it from the town of East Greenwich?
This is Bill Landry speaking. That area median income is a regional area median. It's not specific to East Greenwich, but it does represent an area. It's published by Rhode Island Housing, and it changes periodically. But that's not a number we or the town figure out. That's a number that Rhode Island Housing provides us with.
Do we have an idea what it is right now?
Yeah, it's $217,456.
Area median income is over 200,000. I don't think so.
I'm going to move there. That's
well,
awesome.
if you take all the counties, all the towns that are in the county of Kent, and you add them up and divide by 5, it comes out to 270 something, but you're working on 80% of that, right?
think
You might be talking house price as
I didn't
opposed
say
to,
income, I'm sorry, I said income, I mean median price, median price.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, no, the standards isn't based on the price of the home necessarily. They do have a maximum house, but mostly it's driven by the income of the occupants. And it takes into consideration any condominium fees or anything like that. And it ends up being, the maximum ends up being based on what a household should be paying for housing as a percentage of their overall income. So you do have an absolute maximum on the for sale units. The rental units in the multifamily houses, it's a little bit different. That's also based on an area median on rents, but it's a much broader area that's taken into consideration. It's actually the Providence to southeastern Massachusetts circle that would also capture East Greenwich. It's much more of a wider region for what the maximum rents would be at each of the income levels. So I think what we're talking about on a project like this is the majority of the affordable homes being at 80% or more of median income, which is moderate income households, and whatever their incomes would support at the time. This all gets calculated at the time the development is actually developed, but we have to take a snapshot of it very soon because we'll be proceeding before Rhode Island Housing over the next few weeks to get a letter of eligibility for this project that will require us to have those levels determined. So by the time this project comes to the master plan level, there'll be much greater detail on what that affordable housing population will probably look like, what the housing prices would be if we were developing it today, and what that median level of income would be.
So you have no idea right now?
Well, I could guess at it. I mean, we just did a 100-unit project in East Greenwich, but that was at a lot of those units were at the 30 to 60% level because it was a tax credit rental project. There's some possibility that our multifamily housing could be developed that way, or a component of it, but it's too early for us to be able to tell tonight.
Lisa, that might help Mr. Brilliant. I know we had a fact sheet that you had done up a couple of years ago on how the sales prices are calculated based on 80% of a median income in a given area. Is that something you could put up online, or basic calculation like that to show about how it's done? Because the median income is a number that we know.
Yep. So it is based on household size. So a 2-income earner household with 2 kids is going to be rated differently than a single income earner with 4 kids and what size unit they need. So it's a complicated formula, and we can certainly make the formula available. And then, as Mr. Landry alluded, when the formal application is made at master plan and they understand their numbers better, we would do a more in-depth analysis of what an actual sale price would be for a unit for sale and an average rent for a rental unit.
That would be good. And I think maybe the whole idea behind the calculation is for a person that makes 80% of the median income in a given area, with taking money out for food and taxes and other stuff that just people have to pay. They calculate what kind of house, the price of a house that they could buy if they made 80% of the median income.
Right.
So I'm just pointing that out that as the general theme of the calculation, that's what they're trying to get to.
Yep.
Okay.
So 130 something units basically are going to be at subsidized rates.
Yeah, you know what? Let me.
If you got
Mr. Brillen, my experience on the board over the past several years is that there can be a lot of confusion surrounding this. First of all, it's not low income. Secondly, it's not subsidized income. So in the numbers, when you finally see what they are, you'll probably determine the same thing that I have when these projects have come before the board in the past, which is it's pretty fair and it's pretty reasonable, and it's probably not going to raise a whole lot of eyebrows, and it works, and it helps the town too towards our comp goals as well. So it shouldn't be a shocker, and I would suggest that just be patient, wait till they get a little bit closer to giving you some range and ideas, and I don't think you're going to be completely surprised by it.
I'm gonna hold you to that. I won't be shocked. But just one comment, and this is strictly a comment. I'm not casting any aspersions in anybody's direction. But I remember the housing developments, Levittown after the Second World War. I see all these developments similar to what Don Powers put together. I see them in Florida, where, you know, if you run water in one house, the neighbors can hear it because you're on top of one another. We moved here 14 years ago, and we have a 6-acre parcel with horses in the backyard, and that's not the neighborhood I bought into. And now all of a sudden, across the street, I've got 418 units, and everybody's on top of one another. Admittedly, honest, Don, truthfully, it's beautiful. It looks great, but that's not where I want to live. And all of a sudden, to have that thrown on me after I've been here for 14 years, I said it's a little hard to swallow. So give me a chance to get it down with a couple of bourbons, okay?
I appreciate your comments. That's great.
Thank you for your time.
No problem. Thank you. It made me think what kind of bourbon I'm going to have later. Any other hands being raised?
I'm not seeing any other hands.
Okay.
Yeah.
See, that wasn't painful.
Not at all.
And I think it was well worth it.
Jason,
Yes, sir.
because I keep bringing it up every time, can Lisa remind people who are listening only on the phone how they go about making sure that their virtual hand is raised in this case and situation?
Yeah, I'm sorry. We do have a handful of people who appear to be not on the computer, but simply on a cell phone. You do need to hit *9 on your phone to virtually raise your hand. So if you're on a smartphone or some other phone at home, that's what you need to do if you're trying to speak, and then we can get you unmuted if you'll get yourself identified. I think most people are definitely on a computer, and they're on the, they certainly can see the screen, and we can tell if they're raising their hand, but we do have a handful that are call-in listeners. So
okay,
*9 will get you recognized.
All right, so we'll give that a minute and people can do it, and you can scream out if something happens. But other than that, any parting comments from anybody on the board for the applicant, and then we'll let them go and we'll move on.
I'd like to thank Mr. Powers again. You know, good job with the presentation. We appreciate it. And Mr. Landry as well. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much for your input.
Okay, great. If no one online, Lisa, is clamoring at the bit, we will move on to the next agenda item. Thank you, Mr. Landry, and your team.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Thanks to the folks at home too participating. We really we need your input just as much as everybody else's. So we're moving on to our number 5 on our agenda, the third and last major item that we have. It's the third reading and the adoption of our proposed amendments to the Land Development and Subdivision Review Regulations. And again, this was the third time we're doing it. And Lisa, this was to get our fees that we charged back in line with the rest of the state and with the time that has gone by. We didn't have any, there were a couple comments the first time. The second time, there weren't many comments, or none, I think, and we were just waiting for the last time, right? Is that true?
That is very true. So we are required to basically have 3 readings, much like the town council does for adoption of an ordinance. So the process we follow is similar, but you are fully authorized to adopt this regulation amendment on your own. It doesn't go to the town council. We introduced this matter back in June. We gave you a fairly straightforward chart of our fees and gave you some comparisons to some surrounding communities and made note of the fact that they haven't been updated in about a decade. We then conducted the required public hearing at our first August meeting, and then we continued it tonight, not continued, but closed the public hearing and docketed it for tonight for a decision. So I think we're ready to vote unless there are any other last minute questions or comments about the structure that was proposed. No alterations since last time.
Any comments or questions from anybody? I think we're good with it. I think, yeah, you guys did a nice job getting us back into the, I was going to say 20th century, but I think we're in the 21st anyway. So, I think we're good. And if no one has any comments or questions, I think we can probably just take a motion to adopt the ordinance as written and read out in public.
Is it posted in the meeting docs for the public to see?
The actual ordinance?
Yeah, is that how it gets posted with the meeting minutes or with the meeting agenda?
Are you asking how it will be posted upon adoption or how it was made?
How it was posted, how people know what we're talking about right now.
I don't know what I'm talking about.
People have no idea what we're talking about right now. No. So what we were required to do was run an ad 3 times in the newspaper that we were considering amending our fees. So the ads ran. We published them in full with the agenda when we conducted the public hearing. And since it was continued tonight just for decision, I don't think we republished them because we did all of that for the public hearing and first reading. So tonight we're just going to vote. What's the plan? Unless you want us to republish it all and delay this vote until next time.
No, I just want to make sure the 12 attendees knew what we were talking about and what we've already gone through. I think everybody on the board's painfully familiar. Or I should say intimately familiar, but I don't know if other people that are on the call or at this Zoom know.
Nate, if you'd like, you can volunteer to be the town crier down on Main Street.
I'll read it right now if you put it up on the screen, but that's okay.
I think the public's had plenty of opportunity to see that we're trying to get the fees back in line, and it really just helps the overall town.
I can give a quick synopsis if you think that's necessary. In super basic terms, the town's fees were last adopted in 2010, and we're talking about administrative plan review fees. So the fees that a developer would pay to get a project considered by the town staff and the planning board. So we're not talking about an everyday Joe who just wants to build a garage in their backyard or something like that. We're talking about a professional land developer who's subdividing property or doing a major land development like the one we just reviewed. In the past, our fees were calculated on a per acre basis. Our proposal is to convert that to a by unit because the complexity of the projects is such that we're seeing really large scale projects on very small sites, like the one we saw earlier tonight, 9 units on 30,000 square feet. They didn't even pay the fee for a full acre of land, but it was 9 units in a very complicated review process that we spent about 2 years on. So we would just like to have the fee structure reflect the level of effort that it takes to have 10 or 11 town professional staff plus the board have to have multiple hearings on complicated projects. So it's a modernization effort. And that is it in a nutshell. I can walk through the actual fees. I feel like we've beat this to death, but if
That's
you
a nice summary. Thank you.
Interested, we can go on if you want.
I feel very comfortable with the level of detail that we've given this matter throughout each of our board meetings. So I would like to move forward.
Okay.
He said the word move. So I'm assuming that meant Mr. Murphy moves that we adopt the ordinances, the new ordinance as Lisa has written. Is that true, Mr. Murphy?
Agreed.
Is it seconded by?
Second.
I didn't see who got it. I think it was Mr. Pels.
That was Eric. It was Eric.
Sorry. I'm looking on the wrong side of my screen. Okay, great. So we have a second on the motion. Any discussion? I think we're good. Lisa, you can have us vote on this, please.
So when I say your name, please indicate whether or not you are in favor of the motion to approve the new fee schedule. Mr. Who made the motion? Mr. Murphy?
Yeah.
Sorry, Mr. Yatakis,
Aye.
Mr. Lupovitz,
Aye.
Mr. Ginsburg,
Aye.
Mr. Gomez,
Aye.
Mr. Pels,
Aye.
and Mr. Murphy.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay. You got some new money coming in, Lisa.
Yay.
That'll pay
We
for
have
some.
Our
reached,
manager will be happy.
we have modernized and reached 2020 at long last.
So that is it for our agenda. So we just need a motion. I goof this up every time and Andy's gonna get mad at me because I can't remember. A motion and a second or a motion and a vote? I forget.
A motion and a vote, no second needed.
All right, now we got it.
Make a
I'll try to
motion.
remember next time. Anybody want to adjourn?
I will make a motion to adjourn. Yes.
Okay. And we're all gonna vote just by raising our hand this time. We're unanimously adjourning in a silent mode with everybody's hand raised.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Great.
Nice job,
Thanks,
Jason.
everyone. Great job,
Yeah.
everyone.
Thank you.
All
Good night, everyone.
right. Good night. Good seeing
Right.
everyone.
Take care.
Night, y'all.